Senator, thank you very much. Great to have you
Martha.
with us tonight. First of all, this issue of relief to America in the face of the economic blow that is ongoing. You have a bill with Susan Collins. And also, I'm curious about your response to the fact that 8 GOP senators voted against some of this relief package today.
Yeah, look, first of all, just on the relief package vote, there was a lot of things in there that under almost virtually any other circumstance I wouldn't support. Wouldn't support any of those measures. I think we are at a time right now of such a unique circumstance that the psychological impact of not having voted for this today and taking it down would have been traumatic. And I think that's why the president supported it. There are things in that bill that need to be fixed and that are wrong, and that's why we are racing to get this additional bill, this third piece of legislation, out the door. And one of the prominent features of that is assistance to small business. And that's the piece that we're working on, and we're trying to finalize tonight, working with Secretary Mnuchin, as you said, Senator Collins, Senator Crapo, Senator Alexander, and others, and with our Democratic counterparts too. And the basic gist of it is use private individual banks at the community level, along with the bigger banks, to get cash rapidly into the hands of small business. And if they use that money to meet payroll for the next 6 weeks or so, and their other expenses of just staying afloat, but more importantly, the payroll, they will not have to pay that back. There'll be forgiveness. If they use it for other purposes or beyond that, then obviously that would turn into a loan. But we have to keep people employed. We cannot allow millions of Americans to be laid off and disconnected from the workforce and be home quarantined and not knowing if there's a job for them in a few weeks when this all goes back, we hope, to business.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously concerns about the whole thing in terms of how some people say, it's sort of throwing money at the problem. And if you send people checks for $1,000 or $2,000, does it really get back into the economy? I'm sure you have concerns about that. And I understand, the urgency that you express as well. I listened to Senator Manchin today say, these should all be loans. The money should be returned in time from these companies just to sort of get them through this period. What do you say to that?
Well, there's a couple things. I think generally all of that is true. So let's say that this is a normal economic downturn caused by decisions made by the market or bad decisions made by companies. That's one thing, and that's what we have faced in the past. We need to understand what we're dealing with here. What we are dealing with here is a public health crisis, and the way the government has had to respond to this crisis is by telling the private sector not to open, not to work, not to serve customers, not to make money. And so I don't know how they would pay that back. We have basically stopped the private industry in this country. We have intervened to stop it in order to save lives. So this is a very different circumstance from what you saw with the economic downturn in the late 2000s or what you've seen in the past with downturns. This is government mandates. Government is basically by fiat telling the private sector it cannot function. Businesses will close, but in the interim, they're going to lay off millions of Americans who are going to be stuck at home in quarantine or not going out. And on top of that, not even knowing if they have a job to go back to one day. And the impact on this country that would have is devastating. And the impact on small business. If you're a small business and all of your employees are laid off, and then we tell you, okay, you can restart now in a few weeks, in many cases, the employees won't be there anymore. Now you got to go out and hire new people, retrain them. By the time you get started, it's all over for you.
So I'm just getting word that Florida Representative Mario Diaz-Balart has announced that he tested positive for COVID-19 after he developed some symptoms on Saturday. With regard to just a reaction, I guess, to that. Obviously, everybody hopes that he will recover soon. But in the larger sense, in terms of how Florida is dealing with this.
Florida has a unique challenge. We are a state that had a bunch of young people in for spring break and that visit us all the time because they want to go to the beach and out to the clubs at night. And then we have a very significant population of people that the statistics tell us are at a high risk of a very bad outcome. We have large retirement communities in our state. So it puts us in a very unique situation. I think the state government is doing everything it can. I think local officials have worked hand in hand with them to respond. But we, like the rest of the country, I think have some big challenges in the days ahead. This is a real test for our country. We are being asked to mobilize as a people, despite our political differences, despite all the other things that are going on. We are being asked to mobilize as a people to confront a threat. And traditionally, that has been a foreign threat or an invasion or a military threat. But if we can't flatten the rate of infection, we put the lives, not just of the elderly, but of others in danger because hospitals will not be able to meet the demand of hospital beds and ventilators.
Well, let me, with regard to what you just said, if I could just back up just a moment, I don't know how many spring breakers came this year. Last year it was about 1.5 million. Was it a mistake not to shut that down, to shut those beaches down right away? Because everyone has been seeing these images, and I know it's not all the beaches, and some towns have shut down. But should they have all been shut down right away?
Well, I think that's going to be a good question to look back at. And I tell everybody we're going to have a lot of time in the future to look back and examine how we responded to this at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. And I'm not saying those aren't valid questions to ask now. They could be. But we, at this moment, really need all the energy we can to deal with what we're doing right now moving forward. We can learn from the past so we don't repeat it, but we can't change the past. We can only influence what happens from this point forward. Right. And if we don't spend all our energy and time figuring out how to get this under control, how to build up the healthcare capacity of ventilators and hospital beds, how to invent an antiviral or get an antiviral into the market so we can lessen the impact of this and keep people out of the hospital and eventually develop a vaccine, if we can't do that, then we're going to face some dark days ahead. I believe we can, I believe we will, but we can only do it if everyone does it.
Yeah, I believe we can too. I've been hearing some really promising things about some of these antivirals that they're working on, and I think it's exciting the amount of energy that's going into it on the part of American scientists, and I just really feel so positive about what they're gonna be able to do. I want to talk to you about. I'm about to speak to Michael Oslin, who's an Asia scholar at Stanford, and I want to ask you, because you've been very out front on this as well with regard to globalization and concerns about China. Do you look down the road and say, well, we go back and say that was a game changer? That was a point at which globalization and our interactions with China came under scrutiny that produced real change in how we deal with them?
I expect it will. I hope so. I do believe that this is a hinge moment in history that will is going to change the way we've done business as usual, business in this country and frankly around the world. But here's the essential truth to it. What we are learning now, unfortunately the hard way, is that we are all for free enterprise and capitalism. I'm for that 100%. But capitalism is always going to move money to the most efficient outcome. And that's generally the right thing. We want that. But from time to time, the most efficient outcome isn't in our national interest. So the most efficient outcome is that these medicines be made in China. That is not in our national interest. It's not in our national interest that we can make these ventilators, but we can't make the parts that go into the ventilator. These are critical national security matters for the future of our country. The industrial capacity of a nation still matters. You still have to be a place that can make things or be able to get things from places that are reliable. And that is a painful lesson that we are learning right now that we need to institute in policy so something like this never happens again. In the case of China in particular, they have openly threatened to cut us off from medicines. If that is not a wake-up call to this country, nothing ever will be.
Throw us into a sea of coronavirus was one of the quotes that was used. So, what changes today with regard to that? How that's not the kind of thing you can turn on a dime. But are there changes being made that, production that's being ramped up here to get us through that and change
it? Well, not enough. Not enough, but I give the White House credit. I'll give you a perfect example. Well, one of the ways to insist that things be created here is to create demand for products that are made here. And so the Buy America initiatives that the White House is pursuing through the VA and the Department of Defense, that you have to buy more pharmaceuticals that are manufactured and the component and the ingredients come from the U.S., that creates a market for someone to actually do that. Rare earth minerals. All the technology we use relies on these rare earth minerals. You're not going to have investment in rare earth minerals in this country unless we do something to incentivize it, because China is going to underprice it. That's what they'll do. They'll undercut the price as a strategic advantage to make it not cost effective for us or anyone else to do it. But what that tells you is if they cut us off, it doesn't matter what we invent. We can't make it because we need the ingredients and they have them. So we've got to, the argument I've made is we have to have an industrial policy, and you can do that without abandoning capitalism. But what it requires you to do is to say it is in the national interest of this country to be able to make things. And from time to time, in order to do that, you have to create incentives that allow you to invest here instead of somewhere else.
Yeah, and to require that a certain percentage of anything is always made here so that we're not reliant on China for these things that we desperately need. Senator, thank you. Always good to have you here. Thanks for being here tonight.